Yeah, welcome everyone. We have two presentations, one from Jari-Pekka, the Managing Director of EGDF, and then from Ben Abraham, the Sustainability Lead and Research Lead of the Sustainable Games Alliance. I'm the Managing Director of the Sustainable Games Alliance and will host the session. So we will give the two gentlemen time to talk about the changes, and we'll collect all the questions during the presentations in the chat. And after the presentations, we will have time for a Q&A. Just for you to know, we record this session, but we only record the presentation bits. After the presentation, we will stop the recording, so we have the possibility to talk and ask our questions like in a more private manner. Maybe also for you to know, we have different kinds of companies represented here, but also local games associations. We had representatives of like some political representatives who were registered. I haven't seen them participating so far. Yeah, and a couple of researchers. So we are a very mixed group. And now I would hand over to Jari-Pekka to kick off the session.
Thank you so much, Maria. Happy to see a wide variety of people, from academics to civil society to, of course, the companies that make the magic happen. Could you go to the next slide, please, Ben?
Mm-hmm.
So EGDF represents 24 trade associations from 22 different European countries, and altogether in our network, we currently estimate that there are over 2,500 game developer studios that employ over 40,000 people. And if you go to the next slide. So EGDF is building a digital single market area where games industry ecosystem where operationally and artistically autonomous self-publishing European cross-platform game developer studios flourish. So if you ask from us, what is our magic recipe for building competitiveness and growth in Europe? It's of course self-publishing and enabling the studios to access to talent, access to funding, and access to a route on the top of the value chain. And if you go to the next slide, and how we do it, we are believing our autonomy, adaptability, and social and environmental responsibility. And of course, in this context, these omnibus changes are highly important for the games industry. This whole process, how we got involved in the magical world of CO2 calculators, etc., was very different from many other processes, because it was real grassroots movement among the game developers who started to push the trade associations to say that, look, this is not this kind of normal PR thing. We really want to save the planet. And there was, across Europe, we saw a number of grassroots initiatives emerging. And of course, we started to support them. And we have had a number of calculators from different countries we have been helping to build up. And now, of course, we are a member of the Sustainable Gaming Alliance and playing for the Planet Networks and using them to enable game developer studios to build the better future for our planet. If you go to the next slide. So, Omnibus. The introduction. I completely understand that when I've been discussing this with many companies, there is a lot of frustration. Like for years, people in this call have worked to actually be compliant with the regulation. And now the Commission says that, we actually going to change the rules. And there is, of course, a big question like, okay, does this actually mean that we have to rehire all the expensive consultants on again, start the process from the scratch. So let's deep dive into that. Next slide, please. So first, it's of course important to keep in mind that sustainability is not just about reporting. And if you go to the next slide. So how did we, first of all, end up to here? Previous European Commission so von der Leyen's first commission was highly dedicated to ensuring that Europe takes the lead in building the better tomorrow for this planet and introduce number of strict environmental regulations. Among them, of course, the corporate sustainability reporting directive and corporate sustainability due diligence directives, etc. However, in July 24, when the von der Leyen started his second commission, he introduced the political guidelines telling that now we have focus also on the competitiveness of Europe. But it didn't mean that they would be backing up from environmental topics. In September, we got Draghi's report based on what von der Leyen has ordered from him to produce about finding ways to introduce competitiveness of the Europe. And a key part of that was to reduce the red tape for the companies, which itself is a good idea. And then in January, we saw the competitiveness compass clearly introducing the idea of making changes in the Omnibus directive in a way that the Commission balances environmental sustainability with less reporting obligations and bureaucracy. And now in February, we got the Omnibus 1. So if you go to the next slide, please. So where are we at the moment then? So now the Commission proposal for corporate sustainability reporting directive and due diligence directives are on the table. They have been published by the Commission. And now the European Parliament and Council will review and negotiate these directives. And ideally, of course, what the Commission wants, this will be a smooth process happening in 1 year. And by end of the year, everything will be ready. But the experience tells that sometimes this happens, sometimes it takes years. Like I have seen directives that's been stuck in the negotiation for almost a decade. In the end, they will be published in the official journal, and for example, in the corporate sustainability directive, there will be 10 to 12 month transition period. And if you go to the next slide, please. On the EU taxonomy regulation, the process is a bit different. That's EU Delegated Act, and the Commission has now published the proposal for the public consultation. And after the consultation, the Commission will adopt the act. And of course, there's objection period from the Parliament and Council should they want to intervene on what the Commission is doing. So we are very much in the stage now where Commission proposals are on the table, and now it's up for the industry to step in and tell our opinions. And if you go to the next slide, please. It's also important to keep in mind that this is not the only thing on the table. At the same time, now there is new EU funding instruments are introduced, and many of those will include strategies to ensure a more sustainable and environmental respectful industry, basically meaning that environmental sustainability will be one of the eligibility or award criteria among the new EU public funding instruments. This is an example from the Creative Europe that introduced this instruments requirement already a few years ago. Then on social responsibility side, PEGI co-regulatory system is moving from a content-based rating system to more this kind of self-regulatory system for business practices. Very important to follow what is happening on that side as well, because of course the European games industry is committed on ensuring the protection of minors through that system. And then there's a big debate about accessibility directive and gender balance in directors and gender pay gap directives at the moment on the table as well. So lots of things are happening. And yeah, as you can see, regardless what happens on the corporate sustainability side, we still have the accessibility directive in 25 and its implications for the industry. It's one of the big questions. How that will impact is mainly focused on platforms, but there will be multiplier impacts on the industry, as well as 27 gender pay gap directive that many companies are now struggling to figure out way to how to measure the gender pay gap. So lots of questions on the table, but basically, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, but when a quick look on the topic, what we have seen is that on the corporate sustainability reporting side, there will be this kind of 2 years hold. And if everything goes as planned, the reporting would start from the year 27, meaning that you would report the 27 numbers in 28 for the big companies, and SME requirements would be relaxed. And if you go to the next slide, please. This is, of course, considering the idea that Commission is successful. There is a risk, of course, that things will get delayed. Parliament will say that, yeah, we don't agree and we will want to continue the debate, and then we might be in the situation where the regulation is not ready in time and old regulations and directives are still in place, and that would be, of course, quite a challenge for the industry, creating the unpredictability we don't want to see. So let's see what happens in 2025. Go to the next slide, please. So it's not going to be an easy ride. And if you go to the next slide. So EPP, the main party in the European Parliament, is of course strongly supporting von der Leyen, one of their own, saying that Omnibus will be going to be implemented quickly and effectively, and they are really, really strongly supporting it. If you go to the next slide. Social Democrats, that is the second biggest groups, are saying that simplification of EU legislation must not endanger existing achievements for the citizens and business, so much more critical, and are most likely going to negotiate some changes into directives, proposed directives. Go to the next slide. And then the third biggest group, being the BFE, basically have launched anti-green crusade against all environmental regulation, being from the far right, so going a completely different direction, go even further than the proposals on the table. Go to the next slide, please. And the ESRD, sorry, I have to change the, they're about the same size as the BFE, but they have agreed to support the BFE group. Go to the next slide, please. Renew Europe is more in line with the Social Democrats, saying that, yeah, simplification should not roll back climate goals. So they are more liberal centrist group. Go to the next slide, please. And Greens, of course, are fighting heavily against any changes and relaxations on this side. If you go to the next slide, please. On the left, again, is united against any changes favoring big business and over workers and climate. And next slide, please. So where are we at the moment then? So if the EPP wants to get this through, it needs at least Social Democrats and Renew Europe to reach the majority in the parliament. And this is one way of finding a solution, but this would mean changes in the Commission proposal. If you go to the next slide, please. And then there is also the white card, the new far-right group in the European Parliament, called Sovereign Nations Group. And if they unite with other far-right groups and EPP, they are able to move things forward, but the political cost for the EPP would be huge. If you go to the next slide. So there is, of course, small possibility that this will go through, but like if the EPP would unite itself with a party that is in the supporting Kremlin, is known to have close connection to Chinese government, and now most likely working very closely with the Trump administration, it's going to be, well, clearly disastrous for the EPP. So there is small chance for this coalition to emerge on this topic, but let's see what happens. Unlikely, perhaps. And yeah, so now it's time for the games industry to build its position. If you go to the next slide. So from EGDF side, we are now starting the debate on our side, hopefully in collaboration with the Sustainable Gaming Alliance. What we want to see is a predictable process. So it's completely unacceptable that things change once a year on what direction should companies go. And of course, we want to see better, simpler, and more affordable regulation and directives coming out of this process. Generally speaking, we want technology, content, and business model neutrality. We want full harmonization. We want uniform rules and pro-innovation rules. We want clear rules, and we want a global approach. So whatever Europe comes up, it has to be in line with other global standards on this side. And on access to CO2 data is, of course, very crucial for many of the companies in my framework, because they want to calculate the CO2 emissions of their games and also from the players. And this requires access to CO2 data from the service providers and the relevant players. Okay, That's my contact information if you have any questions. And now it's up to Ben.
Great. Thanks, JP. Yeah, what a wild ride, huh? I mean, yeah, it's a lot. Before I jump into my part of the presentation today and get into some more of like the implications for what these proposed changes are, I wanted to just take a moment to introduce the Sustainable Games Alliance to any of you who might be watching who haven't come across us before or haven't been to one of our events previously. So the Sustainable Games Alliance exists to help the games industry through the sustainability transition. We are a not-for-profit cooperative. We are owned and governed by games industry members who own shares in the cooperative, and they tell us what to do and give us direction, elect the board. Our mission is to make games the most sustainable form of entertainment we can, with decarbonization as the #1 priority, because we believe that it is the foundation on which all of the rest of sustainability issues kind of flow from. If we don't get that right, then nothing else is going to work. And so what we're building is a self-regulatory framework, the SGA Greenhouse Gas Emission Standard. We facilitate knowledge sharing. We want to develop tools, workflows, processes, other kind of services that help you to understand your emissions, understand your climate impact, and collect and validate data to facilitate that and make that a whole lot easier. So the core team is Maria, who you saw at the beginning and did our intro. Jiri Kupainen is also on this call listening. I think he's renovating his cabin at the moment. He's the chairperson of the board, and myself, I am Dr. Ben Abraham, the research and standard lead and author of the Digital Games After Climate Change book, which was the first book about the kind of global impact of the games industry on the planet. The SGA is backed by some really heavy hitters in the games industry. People like David Helgeson, the founder of Unity, has thrown his sort of support behind SGA. Petri Jauveletto is on our board, co-founder of Remedy and Seriously. Yanni Karama from Secret Exit, Daniel Villain from Arctic Game, and Sonia Fizek, the head of research at the Cologne Game Lab. That's our kind of board. In addition to the governing board, we also have an advisory board, which is made up of experts from civil society, people with expertise and experience in developing standards and other kind of mechanisms to facilitate climate and sustainability, including Dirk Holverscheid, who will be facilitating an event for us in just a couple of weeks, which I'll come back to. So I wanted to take a moment at the very beginning to also acknowledge the kind of state we're at, and not just the political landscape, but the affective or the emotional landscape as well, right? I suspect that most of us, or probably all of us in this call, believe in the power of sustainability disclosures. We understand how important it is to have clear and understandable data. We know that it's not the extent of sustainability, but it's a necessity for it. It's the building block again. And so many of us had a lot of hope invested in the CSRD and the other kind of related green directives, and have invested a lot of time and effort and even emotionally in it. I certainly have. And when I saw the leaks of the Omnibus starting to come out the other week, I sort of was a bit apprehensive, concerned about, the extent of it. Could this really be what they're cooking up? And then it came out, and yeah, it was basically what the leaks had been suggesting. And so I just want to acknowledge to begin with that there's quite a bit of disappointment, I think, out there, and lots of it very valid. And I think the temptation there is to sort of give into that and be like, oh, well, we tried, we disappointed again. We don't have a lot of wins in sustainability, I think. But I think the longer I sat with that feeling of disappointment, the more I just sort of started to figure out, well, I saw it in a different light. I started to see that as an opportunity as well. It's not just purely a setback for sustainability, for climate action. I think there's a real opportunity here for us. And so I'll come back to that. Basically, the top level changes that the Omnibus is introducing or is proposing to introduce, assuming that it goes through, and I'm going to operate pretty much on the assumption that some version of it will go through, because I think that's fairly likely, as you know, as rocky as it is. The first major effect that it will have, if it passes in its current form, is the reduction of scope of impacted companies in the CSRD. So my best estimate is that previously about 60, 65 companies, somewhere around about that, were about to be affected by the CSRD over the next couple of years. Raising the threshold to 1,000 employees and the other kind of metrics reduces the scope of the companies that have to report down to about 10 to 15, which means there's lots of companies out there that no longer have to report. Whether you view that as a good or bad thing, that's a different question, but it does now mean that there is going to be a gap there, a data gap. The next major implication of the Omnibus changes are to revise, or the Commission's made a commitment to revise the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. And if you've come anywhere near the ESRS, I think you will probably agree that this is a welcome reduction in complexity. They were an absolute kitchen sink approach to sustainability, throwing everything you could possibly want in terms of data disclosures at reporters, and maybe we can do better than that. Maybe there's another approach that works. It also proposes to change the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, both in a timing change, but also by limiting the types of requests that companies can make to their business partners to ensure upholding of human rights obligations. But and so the proposal there is to limit the types of information you can request to just those contained in the VSME, the Voluntary Small Medium Enterprise Standard, which I think is now about to kind of become the de facto standard of ambitious companies that want to do the right thing. And it obviously has a lot more friends. The CSDDD, I've seen a lot more people talking about going into bat for it, basically. The ESRS, I don't think had very many friends. I didn't love it, but I recognized that there was some value to it at the same time. So yeah, postponement of reporting requirements. This is probably the big shock to the system. The stop the clock proposal, which would see companies, when it passes, to basically say, all right, we've done enough, we'll come back to it in 2 years' time. And I think that for us is a sort of that's the biggest shock, that's the most disruptive element of it, but it also enables a reset of focus. It means we can shift our priorities from this compliance view to something more effective. And lastly, the last thing that I wanted to kind of mention is the deletion of sector-specific standards from the CSRD. So that previously was only probably going to have a minimal impact anyway. But again, I think there's an opportunity there to look at it and say, okay, we're no longer going to be asked to comply with, say, an IT one or a general internet communications standard. The EU is not going to produce that anymore. It's not going to be coming. So now, what is coming instead? Well, I think we have a chance to set our own. So this is my pitch. This is how we move from disappointment to seeing this as an opportunity. The reduction of scope of the CSRD, it does mean missing out on things that we were looking forward to, right? A consistent approach to disclosures that was going to cover just about everyone that would have really mattered, had a real significant footprint, which would have led to things like comparable data and benchmarks across companies. It would have led to improved transparency, a better sense of who's performing well and who is not, more support for claims that we're actually improving. It would have provided a level playing field because everyone would be consistently reporting to the same standard. It would have also facilitated better strategic decision making, which is really what we're all about, right? Like, we want to know, where do we take action? Where do we get the biggest bang for our buck? Where do we put our limited resources in a time of quite, constrained resourcing for the games industry? I think it's more important than ever that we're really smart about where we invest our time and effort. So these things that we're going to miss from the CSRD, the things that we could see as a loss, we now have an opportunity, if we want to take it, to enable this for ourselves. We can do this as an industry. We can do it as a group, and I'm going to show you like how I think that the best way forward for us is. So there are also still ESG challenges ahead. This is not the end of the road by any means for climate action or sustainability. It's not a defeat. EU Green Claims Directive and Unfair Commercial Practices Directive, still untouched by the Omnibus. So there's going to be a really strict approach to claims about sustainability, claims about who is doing well or who isn't. The CSDDD, it still matters. It's delayed, but it's still going to matter. It's still going to uphold human rights protection. The EU has a whole bunch of other regulatory or other directives as well that haven't been touched. The Energy Efficiency Directive, the ones that JP mentioned, the Gender Pay Directive, they're all going to have impacts on national policy making. And other areas, other jurisdictions are bringing in their own standards as well. California has them, they're pressing forward with them, even as the US pulls back around the world. The last 18 months has seen the most kind of sustainability standard setting activity in, I don't know, forever probably. So you can get a sense of all the different jurisdictions here and some of their changes that are coming. So there's still a compliance challenge, even with the CSRD in its changed form, if that's what happens. So how has the games industry responded to the compliance challenge in the past or up to this point? Well, not super well, because we haven't had a coordinated response, right? This image on the screen here is an update of, pardon me, the Scope 3 categories, the reporting categories of some of the biggest game companies in the world. And you can see that a number of them either don't report anything, have incomplete disclosures, or have made a decision about what they need to disclose or where they draw their boundaries. So yeah, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol doesn't give us the level of detail, doesn't give us the level of information that we need to achieve the kinds of consistent approach across the industry that would enable those things that we're now missing out on because of the Omnibus changes. Category 11, end users, and Category 1, purchase goods and services. Guidance around these topics doesn't get us there. It doesn't quite achieve the level of disclosure that would give us the confidence to say, all right, here's what's happening in the industry, here's what's actually going on. A sustainability standard, a reporting standard with common methods will get us there. It would do that. So, and that would help with reporting. It would remove a bunch of reputational risk. Things like the risk of going in alone, the risk of getting a method wrong, of being seen to be, worse than you really are because no one else is reporting enough. All of those sorts of challenges, they all start to kind of just diminish as we put in place a agreed standard, an approach to how we are going to measure and disclose these emissions. So we want to save money, we want to save time because those things are in short supply. We want to unlock meaningful sustainability action and make it applicable to the games industry specifically. We don't want to use something off the shelf. So an overview of the trends in emissions over the last couple of years. I mean, here are the numbers that I've collected from the biggest game companies in the world. This is from their reporting. I've just tallied it up. The numbers disclosed from 22 to 23 went up by about 1 million tons across scope 1, 2, and 3. But whether that represents a genuine increase in emissions or whether it's just because we're getting better at actually reporting what's happening, it's still really unclear. We don't have a consistent approach to which categories to include, how we calculate those categories. We're not yet being transparent about what the methods are in all cases. And so drawing conclusions about what's going on are next to impossible. So we want to solve this. We want to turn this situation around and make it a much more graspable challenge, much more concrete, much more applicable for the games industry. And we plan to do that by producing the SGA greenhouse gas emission standard for each of the categories of the Scope 3 greenhouse gas protocol. We might break them down into particular components. So we'll start this month with Scope 3 Category 11 for mobile gameplay, move on to console and PC after that. And then you can see some of the other topics we're looking at around, for instance, purchased goods and services, the other big category, things like ad networks, outsourced development, data centers, where they belong in our inventories, basically. Does it make more sense to have it at time of use or at in category 1? So just a little preview of some of the kind of outstanding questions that we want to solve, that we want you to participate in and the industry to help solve together. Around the use of sold products and users, we want to solve the question of what the system boundaries should be like for calculations. What sort of things are included, what's excluded. We want to identify what the levers of influence are for individual developers. Where do we have power to reduce those emissions? It's not enough to just say, okay, here's a number, but how do we then have some influence over it? We want to decide, we want to be guided by you. This is an invitation ultimately, whether we should use an LCA method for end user products or not, like whether the embodied energy or carbon in devices should be included in that, or if that's something that's best left elsewhere. And is real-time monitoring possible? Can we use some of these new technologies that are coming out around the intensity of emissions in local national energy grids? And can we do something with that? Can we harness it for positive outcomes? Ultimately, should we even account for Scope 3 Category 11? Like that's a fundamental question. As I showed in that slide, we don't have a consensus across the industry about whether we should disclose it or not. Who does it belong to? I think we need to solve that question. Scope 3.1, purchased goods and services, things like data downloads, data center usage, real-time multiplayer, like I mentioned. Where does that belong? Does it belong in Scope 3.1 or in 11? We want to solve some of these questions and have your input on it. Activity data, overspend data, we want to get towards a point where we can actually say, these are the things that are causing the emissions, and here are the sorts of actions you can take to reduce those emissions, to optimize software, to optimize engines, to extend the life of infrastructure, things like that. We also want to help with climate risk. We want to help you understand what your value chain might be, or what parts of it, I should say, are exposed to physical and transition risk and being able to disclose that, to make that legible in a really clear and straightforward way to investors, that they can then compare and look across the industry and see who's doing what. So the benefits of joining the SGA, and I hope that everyone watching will consider joining the SGA. We can't do this on our own. This has to be an industry initiative. We are not just producing the standard, and the standard we're also doing, well, we want to build a network of people working on this topic. We want to share the kind of expertise that already exists out there. We want to surface it and make it really accessible to all of the industry. We want to make that a really productive part of the games industry. And yeah, we have a whole bunch of meetups we run with people reporting on emissions, people interested in questions of AI and sustainability, how to communicate about sustainability. And we want to do policy advocacy for you. We want to develop with you the kinds of understandings of sustainability and what we need from policy, what we need from governments, and communicate that as well. Ultimately, enabling benchmarking and just overall the games industry having less of an impact on the planet, because I think that's great. I want games to be around forever. And yeah, I think most of us do too. So if we wait, if we miss this opportunity to you know, make the most of the space, the gap that the EU has now vacated in standard setting and in you know, making action achievable, then we run a whole bunch of extra risks, costs of doing it ourselves, paying consultants. We miss the opportunity to do it together. And have a sort of safety in numbers approach where we have a collective understanding of how we're going to move forward in sustainability, how we're going to approach each of these topics, and we can codify that and make that really clear and strong, reduce the risk of for any one individual company. It becomes about like, okay, well, how do we improve the standard instead of how do we improve our own individual processes? Yeah, and just a whole bunch of other things that we miss out on. So now's the time to get involved and to do it properly, to take really impactful action that I think can stand the test of time, right? Like if we get a SGA standard up and it has the potential to reduce millions of tons of CO2. We can do it without extra unnecessary steps, bureaucracy. We can do it as a group. We can do it as an industry. We can reduce our exposure to risk that would happen if we, you know, take our own individual actions rather than deciding collectively, and reduce the costs just for everyone, because I think everyone is very cost conscious at the moment, which makes a lot of sense. So to kick that process off, we're holding a meeting for SGA members next 2 weeks from now on Wednesday the 19th. 10 a.m. Central European time, to talk about this process, to discuss some of these outstanding questions around sustainability reporting and how we streamline it, how we make it more effective,